Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another Critique of the Week, your favorite Friday poetry workshop. At least I hope so, given all the other options. So glad you could join us today. Let's see who we've got here. We've got, let me scroll way back up. Dr. Q's here, Steve Horrell. We got Tom Barlow in the house. Danette Burmia, good to see you. We got Jamie Thomas. Always wonderful comments. We got Sandra Fees is here. Dr. Q, if I didn't say that already. Patty Arbor is here. Dick Westheimer, hot off the heels of recording the next Poetry Space podcast with us on the squad. Harvey Lee is here. Winston Munn, Nancy Tennell, Paul Buckner, Rachel Grieve, Lynn Schilling, W. David Vine, maybe a first-timer on here. Good to see you. Let's see. Rose Lennard is here from across the pond. Janthi Rangan, good to see you. It's been a bit, Janthi. Chelsea McClellan is here, too. Bryn Pope. Christina Nuevin, Lisa Seidenberg, Katie Dozier, the next room over. Ryan McCarty is here. Cliff Miller, Clayton Clark, Sarah Rashid Khan, Sean Evaningo Sanders, good to see you. Okay, so we got a great crew on hand as always. As always, the goal of this critique, and I'll get this backup camera out of the way. The goal of the critique is to give that workshop experience that we're trying to do, help you see your own poems through other people's eyes, and help you, articulate your own feelings about poems too. Everybody wins. Everybody gets to learn in this process of just talking about poems in more depth. And let me get this set up too, because I clicked the wrong button. Okay. And so we're going to go through the oldest poems in the queue. If you'd like to submit poems for critique, all you have to do is go to rattle.com/page/critique or find that under content up there on our website's menu at rattle.com and submit up to 2 poems. It's nice to have 2. Then we talk about 2 and see any kind of trends between the poems. So that's helpful too. These are not random picked poems from submissions. We don't do that. We don't share things publicly without permission. But Hugh, if you submit here, you expressly permit us to talk about the poems and try to help you improve as a poet. That's always the goal. Leave as many comments as you can in the chat windows, especially on YouTube. That's the main place where we hang out. But Facebook is there. If you're leaving a comment on X, I still haven't figured out where to see it, so don't bother. But let's get right into it. So the first poet up today is Linda Frith, who is a familiar name. I think she comes on to our content sometimes, from Kentucky. And yeah. Oh wait, no, we already did Linda Frith, right? We did Linda last week. Sheesh. Because she's got the poem. Yeah, I guess I just forgot to mark it. Sorry about that, Linda. That was last week. Moving along. This time we have monochromatic stars as a handle. Is there any advice for keeping thoughts connected through stanzas in rhyme? Like, that's a general question. There's a general questions category. If anybody has any general questions, they can leave them in that question, then share the poems. They're 2 really, really short poems. So here we go. And we're going to get through this. We're going to spend an hour talking about poetry, and we'll get through as many as we can in that hour. We're back in February still on the submissions. We'll try to speed along as fast as we can. Let's take a look at this first poet. Now, this is Monochromatic Stars. Here's the first poem, Evanescence. In the twilight, the petals shall fall in the ever-fading plight of humanity's drawl. All right. Well, that's a nice first couplet to a poem. I don't know. Having it be a full poem is kind of not enough really happens. I mean, one of the things that we should talk about is poems need a kind of plot. They need something. A poem is a transformative spell that's being cast. It's not a spell unless it transforms something. It takes you from one place to another. It's got a kind of like a plot like a story does, even though it can be an emotional plot. Or a physical plot or some other kind of plot. But there's a sense of movement in poems that work. And this poem just sort of, it's a nice line, but not quite enough yet. I'd suggest, starting out reading older poets like Robert Frost, if you like form, just read more poetry, basically. Modern poets, Rena Espaillat is wonderful. Check out Rena Espaillat's poems. She's been a guest in the Rattlecast. If you like rhyme, pay attention to meter too, because that oftentimes goes hand in hand. So that's my thought. It's an interesting start to a poem. In the twilight, the petals shall fall in the ever-fading plight of humanity's drawl. I mean, can't you feel like that could be an opening stanza and we could keep going? But that being a full poem, it just doesn't go enough. It doesn't do anything. It's like a line of description is not enough to be a poem. It's not going from one place. It's not changing us if the poem doesn't go somewhere. Even if you look at a tiny haiku, silent after the shooting stars. It's got the silence and the thing that happened in our emotional response to it all in those 5 words. That's the kind of thing that we need to have happen in a poem. Something has to happen. And so make sure something happens. Let's look at the other one, Fading Feeling. It's time to move on to something new. These feelings are gone, yet still they stew. However much I long, the ways you've infatuated, the ways I'm wrong, ripple on my arms lacerated. All right, so there's definitely some nice sense of play. Like it's clear that you like the language and you like playing with the sounds. Again, not quite enough. It's not going far enough as far as making it a poem that moves us and does something to us. So do look up. I'd say again, go back to Robert Frost and see what was going on. Read those poems. And maybe people can offer suggestions too. But it's just there's a talent here. There's an interest in the sound and the language of words, and using repetition to make those words dance in your mouth. That's there. You can feel the sense of rhythm in the ear for poetry. But read more poetry, expand on this, and you'll go great places. So that's my advice for this poem. All right, let's move along to the next poet. And next up is Janet McConaughey. So Janet had was on an episode of the Rattlecast, or not the Rattlecast. I keep mixing all the things we do. The Poetry Space. She was on the Poetry Space for our episode on what's the word? There once was a man from Nantucket. What are those things called? I forget. I'm just drawing a blank. One thing we have to mention is that our smoke alarm went off for no reason, like some kind of malfunction at 3 a.m., an hour after we fell asleep, and we didn't get back to sleep. My brain is a little foggy today, even though so what are those things called? I thought it was going to come back to me. Someone's going to say, what are those things called? Limericks. Thank you, Katie Dozier. Yeah, she remembers. All right. Yeah, so Janet McConaughey was on for the Limericks episode. Thank you, Tara, too. And that was interesting. Now, here she is from Highcat. And we'll see if there's an explanation. I apologize if I'm wrong about having read that 2 pages of short poems are acceptable. These are from an as yet queried manuscript intended as mostly humor. Do they work as haiku and as humor? So here we go. Let's see this. So we'll see. From Highcat. The Crazies. Midnight avalanche thunders into the bedroom on little cat feet. Their frenzied scrabble empties the headboard onto us. Okay, so that's the first poem. These are tiny little poems. And first of all, when we say in the submission guidelines that 2 pages of short, or it's up to 4 poems, 4 pages of short poems, we mean just like this. If they're haiku or they're short poems like that, feel free to put a whole bunch, because we would want to publish a whole bunch of these poems together. We have from Crystal Simone Smith in the fall issue that's at the printer right now. We have, I think, 5 poems or 5 haiku on 1 page, and that's just how it works. So definitely do, when you submit, do that. And she also has little cat feet. I think that's Carl Sandburg. The fog coming in on little cat feet is the reference there, Nancy. So it's the Crazies. Well, let's read this one again. And as haiku, I mean, it's not haiku. Haiku is something very specific in what it does, which, as I like to say, is 2 worlds in one breath. There's other people who have other definitions, but basically that's the heart of it. Is a really short statement. You don't have to. It's short enough, and it's not 17. It's not 575. It's not 17 syllables. It is one utterance. And in the Japanese language, as it happens, there's a sort of a natural way utterances break into 7 mora, actually, but it's the length of 7. So it's like a measure of 3 sevens where there's 2 silent beats is basically what haiku actually is. Doesn't really work in the English language. So we boil it down in English, which is not a Moraic language. It's a stress-based language. We break it down as 2 worlds in one breath. Just get one sentence out there where 2 things happen. And that's really what haiku is. In the Japanese tradition, too, there's a season word going on. There's this whole long tradition of that called ikigo. And we can apply that, but it doesn't really apply as well in English as it does in Japanese because there's not this hundreds of years of history behind which words are kigo. So really, that is the essence of haiku. But anyway, so that's a little talk about haiku. Haiku, they're not, because they're not doing that task. First of all, haiku don't have titles, traditionally or really ever, but short poems, and you can have what's known as haiku stanzas, which are 5, 7, 5 syllables. And that's something you can do if you like syllabic poetry. It's a nice little stanza, but that's not a haiku either. Anyway, let's read this again. The Crazies. Midnight Avalanche. We're going to read this as it's a short poem. That's what it is. The Crazies. Midnight Avalanche thunders into the bedroom on little cat feet. Their frenzied scrabble empties the headboard onto us. So a tiny micropoem. Emily Arnold Fernandez says, I picture a headboard falling, and as someone from earthquake country, that's always scary and not funny. Yeah. Interesting. There is a kind of the title makes the poem a little more interesting. If there was just the description of the avalanche, midnight avalanche thunders into the bedroom on little cat feet. Their frenzied scrabble empties the headboard onto us. Yeah. So the fact that it's called the Crazies is a distance. That's when we were talking in the first poem that it didn't go anywhere, it didn't do anything. That sense of movement is because there was no shift, and the shift here happens between the title, which is somewhat it's commenting on what the poem is actually about, the Crazies, and what that means in this case, and so that works there. As a micropoem that moves because the title has something. So that's something to it. Midnight Avalanche thunders into the bedroom on little cat feet. Like we mentioned that Sandberg reference. I'm reading the Emily Arnold Fernandez says, I love the title, and the first stanza is brilliant. Brian Pope says, I was thinking the headboard emptied as a shadow. Yeah, I think my view of this is they come in, dashing into the bedroom, which young cats do, and knock everything off the headboard, falling onto you, like all the little knickknacks and things. Jamie Thomas says, I don't feel qualified to comment on haiku, but I'm struggling with thunder, avalanches, and little cat feet working together as a cohesive image. It's odd enough to be interesting to me, though. It is interesting. Yeah. And then Dick Westheimer says, can anything come in little cat feet without being cliche? And yeah, especially in such a short poem, if you need something coming in on little cat feet, that's a throwback to that. Katie Jojo suggests as a haiku edit, midnight avalanche, cats on the headboard, and that would work as a haiku. So great. And you see, if it's just midnight avalanche, so we have this avalanche. This is what we mean by two worlds in one breath as we talk about haiku. A great edit down to an actual haiku. You have the avalanche happening at midnight. So you can imagine, you can't see it. It's dark. You hear the rumble. That's really nice. It's one image though. And then the cats on the headboard is a separate thing that you put together by leaping over the cut, which is the kuriji. And that would make it a haiku. An interesting point too, since we're talking about haiku, in that, Katie doesn't have punctuation written out. In Japanese, the interesting thing too, and the other thing that makes you not want to do a 17-syllable haiku is the punctuation is actually spoken. And so if you were to make that a haiku in the Japanese style, it would be something more like midnight avalanche. Oh, cats on the headboard. And there are a whole bunch of things that are kind of like ooh or ah or oh. You know how there's a different connotation and meaning to those kind of utterances where there's not actually a word there? That's the way that punctuation is actually spoken. One is ka. There's a whole bunch of other. I think there's like 15 or something like that. And those are actually spoken too. And that's that sense of a break, a schism. Ancient pond, frog jumps into the sound of water. The ancient pond, the pond that was always there through generation after generation, but then here in this present moment, one frog jumping in, and that sound of the water, which is not eternal, breaking the sense of eternity from the pond. That was the original haiku. That was Basho taking Renga and making it its own little poem, and that's what haiku actually is. So that's the two worlds in one breath. That's what we mean once again. Now here, as one long sentence, punctuated like that, it's too long and too sort of singular to be haiku. You'd have to cut it down the way Katie did to make it a functional haiku, but that does work on its own. But then adding the crazies and their frenzied Scrabble empties the headboard onto us, because you're continuing from one. It's a narrative that's arcing over the haiku. It's not two worlds in one breath anymore. It could fit into a tanka, which is the 5-line form. So anyway, these are just details about labels and traditions and how things technically work. But if you're using haiku and talking about it as haiku, you should know that. But I like it best actually cutting it back to haiku, like Katie did. But you might want to think about tanka too as a form for this. Let's read the next one. Sidewalk story, huddled in blankets. As sharp winds scour concrete steps, he warms a kitten. So again, the fact that there's a title, we talked about this, I think, with Kat Lehman, and I'm not sure if it was on the Poetry Space or when she was on the Rattlecast, but it's sort of impossible. It doesn't work to have three things going on. You can have, if you have two things, you can have multiple ways they interact, but it is this sense of three is one too many. Like it's too complicated to hold the cohesiveness. And that's why we don't have titles in haiku either. And so having sidewalk story, it's three things. There's the sidewalk story, there's huddled in blankets, and then there's the sharp winds warming the kitten, or scouring the concrete steps. Again, this is something you could take two of those elements and squeeze into a haiku, and that works. But with a title, it's hard to work. So let's see. Jimmy Papa says, for sidewalk story, I would leave out the title of the haiku, but I would find a way to shorten it. Exactly. Jimmy says, huddled in blankets on concrete steps, he warms a kitten. And that would work again, too. So, I don't know. And if you have, a short poem like that, it has to maintain our interest and have something happen. And so saying, how to make it a haiku is a better use. It's a really good use of a short form because it's the sort of ultimate way you can condense and have something happen at the same time. That's basically why haiku are so popular historically in work. But you don't have to have it be haiku to make it a successful short poem. We talk frequently about Mike White. There's, of course, Ezra Pounds in the station of the metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. That's not a haiku because it's really three elements, but it's very haiku-like and in its brevity, and it works. So taking that in the station at the metro as an example is a super short poem. Here, Katie Dozier says, second doesn't work as well because it only really carries the weight of a simile. That the body is like a paper towel isn't really enough to be a great haiku. And you don't see a lot of likes in haiku, So anyway, because of that, because it's not. There's a difference between a simile and a metaphor too. And the simile it's like something is sort of a softening of the comparison, and we want to have the one image smashing against the other image or rubbing against the other image in a way that makes sparks, So you could say sidewalk story, huddled in blankets, he warms the kitten. Something like that. Now, as a short poem, does this do enough to make it interesting? And I think calling it the title sidewalk story is pretty interesting. There's enough of a break there that the story after is interesting. Let's see. Just reading another comment. Anyway, so again, I think condensing this would work best, and then for a short poem like that, is it vivid enough to convey and make us feel something, you know? I don't know. Anyway, let's look at the other one, Hunting Cats. Yeah, I think we'll leave it with the one page because we've been talking a lot about these poems, and there are a lot to talk about. Hunting Cats, paper towel roll. It was as long as me, obese and glorious soft, now disemboweled. Yeah. And I guess these are 3 all related. 4 steps from the coffee pot. Dawn entertainment, you step barefoot on a fat half slug. Dawn entertainment. So it's 4 steps from the coffee pot. Dawn entertainment, you step barefoot on a fat half slug. And what's wrong with humans? I bring you a mouse, you take it, pet me, praise me, but you never eat it. Yeah. So what do you guys think of these 3 now? And it's hard. I think they're all supposed to be connected. Paper towel roll. It was as long as me, obese and gloriously soft, now disemboweled. Yeah, so as Danette Burmia says, these all have some interesting images, but none really go anywhere. Paul Buckner says, I think they're all in the cat's voice. You can see the paper towel roll, especially from the cat's perspective. You know, it was as long as me. But again, I think it's a missed opportunity not to make it a haiku. It's really hard to think, given out too, that these are called haiku. What was it called? Haiku cat. I think they're strengthened by making it actually haiku and thinking about how to make them work without just saying they should be haiku or not. It's hard for me. I'm sort of struggling to think of ways to improve the poem without saying just make it a haiku. So I guess we should just go ahead and say we should try to make these all haiku. So why not? Paper towel roll, as long as me, and soft, now disemboweled. Is that enough for a haiku? I mean, it kind of works. 4 steps from the coffee pot. And I think maybe here's a good example of how, we have, again, instead of having the 2 elements, which is central to haiku, and it's because we have the sort of the spark between the 2 concepts playing off. We have these like mental objects, these mental constellations of thoughts and feelings that are both lighting up at the same time. And then we notice these connections that we hadn't before. And that's really the appeal of poems. And when we have 3, it's like 1 too many within the short space. But what it's doing, so 4 steps from the coffee pot, dawn entertainment, you step barefoot on a fat half slug. Those are 3 different thoughts, really. And if we had 4 steps from the coffee pot, you step barefoot on a fat half slug. If we had just those and didn't have the dawn entertainment, that is the kind of feeling you're trying to evoke. So imagine you have the scene, you're 4 steps from the coffee pot, and then this happens in the shift between the 2. And in this case, I don't know if entertainment is where I would go if I'm close to the coffee pot, but then I step on a slug. I don't know if entertaining is where I'd go. Like there's like a disappointment, like a like a grossness, like you're expecting, here's this coffee that I need in the morning, and then this happens. There's something interesting there. But yeah, as Ray Trujillo says, in the coffee pot, just take out the line dawn entertainment. I still think you want to condense it, but that's if your impulse is to have 3 elements in a poem this short, I think that one of the 3 is probably the thing that you want the other 2 to be evoking. And so try to find a way to make those 2 elements evoke the 3rd element. And I think that's the way to think about it becoming actual haiku. Yeah. And Paul Buckner says, I don't think it helps to title each of the sections, maybe 1, 2, 3 instead. Yeah. Channel points out, I'm sure it was entertaining for the cat to witness it. Yeah, I forgot in this moment that we were talking about cats. Yeah, so I think the cat might have been entertained. Let's look at the last one. What's wrong with humans? I bring you a mouse, you take it, pet me, praise me, but never eat it. And so for this one, I think you could make it a haiku by omitting the second line of the poem part. So what's wrong with humans? I bring you a mouse, you never eat it. There's a way you could fit that into a haiku too. So anyway, I think in all these cases, take the 3 and make it 2. Okay, and we are going to move on because really, we say up to 4 pages of haiku, and I don't know, we spent enough time on this. Okay, let's move on. But thanks for sharing those. It's always interesting. I love talking about haiku. Dry Montito says, but would a cat say that he was entertained? That's interesting thought too. All right, but it's really about how much you can get out of 2 things happening in a very tiny space. All right. And it doesn't have to be 2 separate things, by the way, 2 disparate things. It can be 2 different sense of perspective. There's one, I can't remember off the top of my head the actual phrasing, but there's one about a bird on a branch, and it's the 2 different ways of sort of seeing the branch, and that's the 2 worlds by having 2 different points of view too. So that works as well. Anyway, let's move on. But thanks for sharing those, Janet. Let's see, up next, we've got On Wholeness, and the poet is Mohammed Afain from Utah. Any general questions? No. And these are form attempts. These are pretty long, but let's see. I think we'll do the second one first, since it's shorter. It looks like a villanelle. And then we'll look maybe at another one's 3 pages. That's just a lot to go over. We want to move fast, but we'll at least look at this one. Song of Roseblood. I will not let them believe I am you. Dark-aired valley, moon halo, dark dreams. Wound of my wound is your ache when it's true. Red nightingales, thorn-pierced hearts sing blue. Lovers win roseblood and black rose beams. I will not let them believe I am you. Flowers awaken namesake by death's dew that kisses, unkisses, glooms and gleams. Wound of my wound is your ache when it's true. They ask, what color doesn't grief accrue? What escapes lice, night skin, soul daydreams? I will not let them believe I am you. Hinda, if it's my heart, go ahead, chew. In its stutter is his name, and it screams. Wound of my wound is your ache when it's true. My dear young lovers, listen, songs do not glue. What is broken, what falls past love's extremes. I will not let them believe I am you. If my wound is your ache when it's true. Yeah, so there's some nice things. Jamie Thomas points out, I love the use of namesake as a verb. Lynn Schilling, though, says she's lost here. And so for this one, there are a lot of just dropping of articles and the little function words that help guide us along in sentences. And it makes it difficult to read, even while there's some really interesting images and there's some lines that I like in the poem. The namesake as a verb is a really nice use, as Jamie Thomas points out. But we'll read it more slowly and sort of point those things out. But you want to have, poetry is the music of speech. And there's a way natural speech functions. And it has these words that help move us along, organizing how to understand what the words are doing. And they're really important to include them. I'm not going to go back. There is that Irina Espaillat. We've read it so many times. But it's Workshop. Go read Workshop by Irina Espaillat and talk about how important those function words are to maintaining the actual music of the speech. Like, don't cut those out. Those articles are really important, and it clips a lot out, and that makes it feel stilted and strange. Rose Leonard says this is a form, and yeah, it's a villanelle. Lynn Schilling says there's some music here, but no story. Now, and I don't understand either what the... where was it? the blood, wherever the blood comes. I don't understand it. Let's read the poem again, though. Song, or what, Roseblood, there it is. Song of the Roseblood. I don't know what roseblood is. Maybe I'll Google. Maybe it's something specific we could help out by figuring out. Roseblood can refer to two different things: a luxury rosé wine produced by Chateau Esteban, or a Phantom of the Opera-inspired young adult novel by A.G. Howard. I don't see how either of those fit, but maybe. Song of the Roseblood. I will not let them believe I am you, dark. And so we also, the punctuation isn't consistent either. So there needs to be some kind of, their punctuation exists for a reason. It's so we know where to pause and how to break up the structure of the sentence. And the fact that there's no punctuation at the end of this line screws the whole reading of it up, because I should read it like, I will not let them believe I am you, dark Air Valley. And you have to adjust and realize on the fly that there's supposed to be a comma there or something. And it's a pause in a separate chunk. We're moving on to a new clause. And having that not there makes you stop in the middle of thinking about engaging with the poem to recorrect and readdress what you've expected. And that throws you out of being connected to the poem. And so use punctuation as it should be used, unless you're really conscious about not and having a consistent way to make this problem not happen. So anyway, I will not let them believe I am you. I still don't know who the you is. The you is capitalized, which makes it seem important. Or it's a proper noun. I don't know why. Usually we're talking about God if we capitalize a you. So that creeps in as a possibility, but I don't see any other reason why that is. So I'm just a little confused by that. Dark-aired valley, moon halo, dark dreams. So we repeat that dark word twice. And what are the dreams? Where are the dreams? Are you the dreams? See, we get kind of lost just with the language itself. Wound of my wound is your ache when it's true. There's a nice music to that, a great ear for the sounds of a line. So there's that nice rhythm and sense of music, but piecing together what it means is difficult. Red nightingales, thorn-pierced hearts sing blue. And that's just like a mouthful to read, so that doesn't have the music above. Lovers win roseblood and black rose beams. I had no idea what roseblood and black rose beams would be. I will not let them believe I am you. So who am I and who are you? That's why we say we're lost in this poem, because we don't know. Flowers awaken, namesaked by death's dew. And that is a nice line. That kisses, unkisses, glooms and gleams. Wound of my wound is your ache when it's true. And again, there's nice music to that. They ask what color doesn't grief accrue. I like that line. With the villanelle form, you're rhyming lines 1 and 3 in each stanza, and then that third is a refrain. So you're rhyming with true in this line every time, and the true accrue you is a nice rhyme. So I like accrue there, and it feels natural. That's the difference between a good rhyme and a bad rhyme that doesn't seem forced. Is it feels natural. It's an interesting way of saying that, which is what you want to do with a rhyming poem. You want the rhymes to lead you to interesting, still natural ways of saying things. What escapes life's night skin? Soul daydreams. So here the daydreams feel like it's forced to make it say daydreams at the end of this rhyme to rhyme with gleams and beams, and it makes it hard to follow. I will not let you believe I am you. Again, I don't know what this line means, so I don't know who I and you are. Hinda, it's the first moment we feel intimate and kind of personal because we get a name. Hinda, if it's my heart, go ahead. I think there should be a comma after head, but chew. And that's a nice line. In its stutter, in his name, and in its stutter is his name, and it screams. Wound of my wound is your ache when it's true. Again, that line. My dear lovers, so who's speaking? We just really get lost in the I and the you, and so it's really hard to follow and understand what's going on in this poem. We'll take a look at the other one. Well, let me see if I have some other comments. Dick Westheimer says, again, the you issue can be settled with a good narrative title. Yeah, and sometimes I forget to say things because we say them so often. But if you let us know what the actual situation is, instead of Song of the Roseblood, you let us know what the situation is, who the Roseblood is. There's this, the who, what, why, where, and when of a poem. We need some of that so we can understand and follow along and have the context to empathize with. If you don't have, that's the problem. That whole, I don't know if it's attributed to Mussolini or Stalin, but one death is a tragedy, 1 million is a statistic. It's because with the context of one person, you can tie into the details of that and have that empathetic bridge where you actually feel it. But with 1 million people, there's no context. And so with no context, there's no empathy. So we need some kind of context for this to be able to feel what the speaker or the characters are feeling in the poem. We need to know what's happening. And one way we can always do that, or an easy way to do that, is by just telling us what's going on in the title. And then we can know who the I and the you are. This person is speaking to this person about this. If you put that in the title, we might get a lot more out of this poem. Okay. Chelsea McClellan says, I wonder if wound of my wound warrants an epigraph. And that felt like a quote. Is that from Psalms or something? It felt like it's from Game of Thrones to me. Is it from something? There's an I.S. Jones poem that has that phrase. Interesting. I don't know. I'm not sure, Chelsea, what you mean by that. But anyway, let's take a look quickly at the other poem's too long. I think we're not going to do it all, but we'll look at the first section and see if it sort of feels the same way. And this is on wholeness. On wholeness. All absolved by an absence, we don't cry. 3 monkeys of wisdom, pain, a poker. Some saints say truth is but a naked lie. Death and not in the body's soul bridge. Sky, a poet's womb. Do you know when we can still row you across the egg-shaped blue lagoon? I kiss them feet, lick them tears, let the blood dry. Pilgrim of Death Valley, hurt candled light. Night of union is far from your sight. Ever-expanding ego, I am I. Lotus posed, two-voiced, breath beating, your universe a giant prostrating. Yeah. So Chess said about the wound of my wound. It sounded like something too to me. So I'm with you. Danette Burmy says lost again, and yeah, it's the same problem. So this is one of those things where hopefully, the poets Mohammed Afain, hopefully just let the reader in, let us know the situation so we can appreciate what's going on and feel what's going on. Let's see. Emily Arnold Fernandez says, Tim, any thoughts about what it takes to make a long poem work? Often I find myself losing focus from reading other poets' long poems. Yeah, it's a great question. It's a hard thing to do, and not a lot of people do it really well. I mean, look at maybe the 4 quartets, the Eliot. B.H. Fairchild has some great long narrative poems that I like. There are, I really love Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson, which is a whole book-length poem in it's free verse. Mr. Either Or is a book by Puchigian. I just think of it as Pooch. I can't remember his first name right now. Aaron Puchigian. And that was an episode of the Rattlecast where he talks about this Mr. Either Or. And yeah, Kimberly Gibson Trent says, for long poems, make a lot of turns. And yeah, and have it, make sure it's progressing. I think that's the main key. We have, if you watch, another thing to read is an example. There's a long, it's Tony Barnstone in Rattle. It's a long sonnet, film noir sonnet, or noir sonnet, I think he calls it. It's also a radio play. He hired actors to perform it. And you can watch that play out. Listen to it at rattle.com. Just look up Tony Barnstone's... my brain is not working at 100% today. Tony Barnstone, Fighting Airman, what's it called? Barnstone, Rattle, Flying Airman? Is that what it is? Rattle, Barnstone, Tony, Noir, Jack something? Jack Logan, Fighting Airman. Yeah, here, let's take a look at this. Jack Logan, Fighting Airman, The Case of the Red Bordello. And this is, I think it's like 20 sonnets. And And I'm not going to play it because it's got actual music by Kevin MacLeod that will get copyright striked. But go to rattle.com, look up Jack Robin or just Google it. But the point is, see how in a sonnet sequence, you're forced to make sections. Because that's just how a sonnet functions. Everyone has to have a volta. If you're writing a long poem, think of it that way. Think of like every 10th line at least, I need a volta. And then the long poem will keep going. And also Jamie Papa says too, which is great advice, with sections you can switch easily to different things, but with a single theme. Yeah. Another thing, we have a wonderful Poetry Space episode about the braided form with David Kirby, and his way of weaving three separate things into what he calls a braid helps make really great long poems like the Fates from Rattle. So that's another way to do it. If you have to have the key into not making it boring is to maintain a sense of movement. If you look at like novels, there's always some kind of thing at the end of a chapter to pull you back into the next chapter, and you have to think of that is something you got to rope the reader back over and over and over again to make a long poem work. So that's the thing to keep in mind for long poems. Good question. Thanks for asking, Emily. All right. Well, we're gonna leave that poem where it was because it's got the same problem. Just let us in. Let us know the situation so we can appreciate what's going on. And you'll notice too, any good poems that hold our attention, especially long poems, we know what's going on. Like we know the situation. We know who's speaking. We know some element of where we are in time or space or perspective. And we need that as a touchstone to help us engage and connect with the poem. We need something to connect to in order to make a connection. That's just it. Okay. Anyway, like something stable, All right. Next up, we have Eva Sidow from Patra. Where's Patra? Greece. Okay. Eva Sidow from Greece. She's got this love and loss that she sent to my soulmate in a short poem, In Search. So we'll take a look at both these poems. Here we go. To my soulmate. I dance every day with the memory of you. It circles around me, tugging my heart to dance along. Steps on our tiptoes, my dear, we flew away from the acrid air. I was doomed to breathe without you, away from the horrid sight of the world that lacked you, away from the unforgiving earth that entrapped you. We escape through the ether of the cosmos, skipping by the judging paths of time, turning away from the glow of stars and the slow waltz of planets. At last I see you clearly after so long. I speak of how I'd missed you as I run my fingers through your hair. You engulf me in the starlight of yourself and love me, as you always did, as you always had, as you always will. Fear is shrugged away. It's a freezing cold forgotten in the splendid warmth of you. I know now our souls were promised to each other in a deal unbroken by law, by nature, by force, by time. And so this one feels to me like what I would call a private poem, where there's a generality tendency toward private poems as opposed to public poems, because you would give this to the actual to my soulmate, and the soulmate knows the context. And that's one of the things, talking about needing the context in the last poem, it's because we're strangers. We don't know anything. If you're writing a private poem to someone to give to them, you don't need the context. It actually would feel weird if you had too much context because they know. And if it's just written for that person, that's how this poem feels, because it's has some nice rhythms and a really nice sentiment that means a lot to the person it was written to, and yet it doesn't really do a lot for us because there's not that context. It's not a public poem in which we're getting to share the experience. It's a very personal thing between two people. The other thing, as people are pointing out, there's way too many cliches, especially it picks up, having more of a cliche ratio at the end. What there is a nice rhythm though. And I really like the you runs. There's a nice list that ends in you all the time. Flew away from the acrid air. I was doomed to breathe without you. Away from the horrid sight of the world that lacked you. Away from the unforgiving earth that entrapped you. There's a really nice listing, lilting rhythm to that. And so there's an ear for poetry again here. It's just making it A public poem means providing that context, letting it in, and using fresh language. Because what fresh language does, creating new ways of understanding the world is what we're looking for, new ways to wire our own brains. That's why poetry feels so wonderful, is because it's creating metaphor. Poetry itself comes from the word proesis, which means to create. We're making meaning. And you make meaning as human beings with our associative brains through metaphor and through new ways of connecting disparate things. What does metaphor mean? It means carry over. We're carrying one concept over into another concept so they become combined into a bigger, more complicated concept. And to do that in a way that is stimulating to us as strangers reading it, we have to use new, fresh language. And so when Ezra Pound said, make it new, that's what he meant. You have to use new language. Cliches are not interesting to us. They're already embedded in our brains. And so, the glow of the stars, the waltz of the planets, fingers through your hair, engulf me in starlight, the splendid warmth, all those things are just cliches, so they don't add anything new into our understanding and our way of perceiving the world. So Shelley K says, how would you rewrite some of the cliche here? Well, if you wanted to make this, and the other thing too, is that when a personal poem, a lot of times it's a token of feeling, and is an object to hold that, it doesn't really matter that it's cliche. It's a totally different thing. Like the Hallmark card that you give somebody, for their birthday or an apology or a get well card or whatever, the fact that the sentiment there is cliche doesn't really matter, because it's a token of your feeling that you're handing to them. Like you're making a container for that and you're handing it over, and that's where the meaning comes from. And so when you're handing up someone a personal poem like this, it doesn't really matter that they're cliches, in my opinion. Maybe it'd be better if not, but it's not that kind of poem. It's not doing that. It's not. To me, it's not actually a poem. It's a greeting card, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, to make it not cliche and to be a public poem, what we do is fill in actual details about the actual relationship and use that to make symbolic meaning out of things, to make metaphors. And then, if you know that the person really loves doing this, if somebody was really into rowing, for example, then you can take the lever of the oar and the stillness of the water and make that some kind of new way of seeing this emotional experience. And that's how it becomes a public poem that's making something new. And so that's the situation we have. All right, let's do the other one. It's short, and we'll try to get to one more poet today. This is In Search. Take the deepest blue and paint our page. Above scatter specks of shimmers, below a velvet sea of stillness. I look down and watch the echoes of my footsteps leave, ripples stretching every wither, trying to reach you first. I will keep walking, hoping the water guides me to you. Yeah. And so this is a similar type thing. It's a little more unique. There's a little more in the language going on. It's not as cliche. One nice comment. Michael Evans said, so helpful. I wrote my stepmother poem without context, but revised it with context for my writing community. Now I understand why. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Tran points this out too. I also wish there was more complexity with emotion too. Love relationships deepen with tension, I think. Yeah, that's a good point. Jamie Thomas says, who's the you? Not sure I'm on board with every wither though. Yeah, so again, as a public, as a private poem that you're just giving to somebody, you're giving it to you. You don't need to explain the you. And again, it's this public-private thing. If you're handing this to someone, they don't say, who's you? They say, oh, you're talking to me. But we don't know who you're talking to. And so again, Paul Buckner says, where does this poem take place? Exactly. Jimmy Thomas says the poem kind of goes every wither. I like the every wither. I like the playfulness of that. If it was full of things like that, I would enjoy it. Let me read a little bit more. Again, In Search. Take the deepest blue and paint our page. Above scattered specks of shimmers, below a velvet sea of stillness. So again, see how these descriptions are very generalized. Even though a velvet sea is somewhat unusual, and scattered specks of shimmers, you're kind of painting a scene, but it's not a specific scene. It's just this sort of general color of space or something. And if you're going to make it a poem that we can connect with, help us with a real context. As somebody said earlier, where is this taking place? And that's why we want that, because we want to be able to connect again. So it comes down to this so often. I look down and watch the echoes of my footsteps leave. Now that would be really interesting if we could understand what we were looking at with those echoes my footsteps leave. Is it walking through grass? I mean, we had water. I don't know. I'm a little confused. Ripples stretching every wither, trying to reach you first, which just makes us wonder, like, where are you with respect to me, the speaker? It's just hard to follow. I will keep walking, hoping the water guides me to you. And again, it's just so general that we need specifics. We need a scene to build. We need some kind of something going on that we can feel like we're a part of. Something we enter. You want to enter the painting. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to another poem. But thanks for sharing those. Once again, that was Eva Saido from Greece. So nice to see one coming in from Greece. Of course, we have subscribers in, I think, 94 countries now. So the issues float around. No pun intended. Let's see, who next? So this is Nikyo from Nigeria. A wonderful poetry scene in Nigeria. A lot of cafes, spoken word is very big there. We had a Tribute to African Poets issue several years ago, and most of the poets in there are from Nigeria, because once again, when we have a theme, we let everybody who qualifies come in and just see the best that we get, and the vast majority were from Nigeria. A lot of poetry going on there. Let's see what this poem is. In today's poem of the day, actually. What was it called again? Last Supper, that's right, by Chiwenaite Onyekwalu, is another, I believe, Nigerian poet. Anyway, The Heart's Garden. And there were no general questions. Let's take a look at The Heart's Garden, and that's probably going to wrap up the show for today after we talk about it for a while. The Heart's Garden. In the garden of hearts, where love did grow, a tender flower bloomed with petals of snow. It was nourished by tears and watered by sighs, for it was the symbol of a love that did rise. A gentle breeze whispered through the garden so fair, "Why do you love him when he's not always there?" The flower replied softly, with a voice so serene, "Because in his presence my beauty is seen." The breeze asked again, "But what of his flaws?" The flower responded, "They are the paths that he draws to reach the depths of my soul where love does reside, and in his imperfections my love does abide." The moral of the tale is that love is not blind, but it sees beyond the surface to the heart and mind. For true love is not based on perfection or might, but on beauty of imperfections that make love shine bright. Yeah. And so with this, the end stops, right? It ends up being sing-songy, like a nursery rhyme, because the rhymes are always true, and they always end on a stress. They always end on a punctuation, some kind of stop. And so it ends up having the same pattern repeated over and over again. And what you really want to do, the beauty of language, there's a reason why we have, there's two reasons why we have, actually, nursery rhyme type poetry. And they're sort of related, so it's almost the same thing. But it's because it's really easy to remember that sing-songy rhythm where the repetition goes on and on and on. And because it's easy to remember, it's also easy for language acquisition. You read books that have good nursery rhyme type structures, the kid can anticipate the next word, and then he can acquire that word and start using it because you start to get that lodged in your head. And that's why we sing to babies with nursery rhymes. It's also why it really helps reading, because for the same reason, you learn what to expect through the pattern, and then you can see the pattern emerge, and then you start to read. And that's how, you don't really, if you read enough to kids, you don't have to teach them how to read. And that's why. But once we're past that age, it ends up feeling like you're singing a nursery rhyme to a kid, and we're not kids. We want complexity. And complexity means breaking it up with enjambment, with changing up the rhythms, by changing the line lengths, and still maintaining the music where it's still a dance, but it's variation within a dance. So we need to write with enjambment. I referenced Robert Frost, so go read some Robert Frost. go look at what percentage of lines of Frost are full stops. It's probably half or something, and there's enjambment in the other half. And it's that variation that makes the music beautiful. Then the other problem is the rhymes Doug Van Hooser says the rhymes are driving the rhythm, but the rhymes are too obvious, so the rhythm is sing-song. And that's true too. And also there are some inversions that are made just to fit the rhyme. And so it's written too much toward the rhyme and meter and not enough toward pushing against the rhyme and meter. There's another great episode, one of the early episodes of the Rattlecast, wonderful formal poet and really a genius, sort of a mad genius, Jamie Hecht, talks about the history, the farm to corn. He's a very dramatic Shakespearean actor too, but he talks about, he's also a psychologist, and he talks about the way expectation and breaking of expectation work on your dopaminergic system. And that's what we want, the variation within the structure. And this is missing that. It's written toward repeating the structure over and over and over again. So it feels sing-songy, and there are also a generality to things like Heart's Garden, Garden of Hearts. Like there's so be more specific and vary your rhythms. We're going to do one more poem, I think, because the other poem's going to be the same for this. So we'll move on to one more poem really quick. And next, we'll do, Dennis Usden. And he sent, I think this is actually, I think this is one poem on a single page, which makes it a little difficult to read. Let's see. And no general questions. It's called The Reel. I have to move the screen around a little bit so we can see it all, but here's The Reel. We gathered at our favorite restaurant in Boca Raton and sat down at a narrow table. A pizza box carried by a waiter tipped to the top of a goblet, and like dominoes, all the crystals fell, the shards of glass twinkled like snowflakes. As they descended in the fluorescent light to the porcelain floor, the light fixtures started blinking in unison, faltering, gasping, then darkness swallowed the building. Thunder rattled the ceiling like pounding fists. People slid under their tables. Others ran to exits they could not see. Some fell and limped to get away like marionettes with their strings cut. Soon the sirens blasted their uneven tones like a mechanical cry to the city. A chorus of cell phones announced emergency messages without explanation. This felt like a nightmare, and it was. Hang on. And then my clock beeped to wake me. Breaking news report on CNN with a message from the White House. All the judges of the United States court system have been fired en masse. A constitution permitted Trump to do so. A line in that document has been found, which had been missing since our founding. Unearthed by the Musk team. It was fantastic and beautiful. But I tried to go back to sleep, but I was afraid of this real nightmare. So that's The Reel. I think it gets into... so there's an interesting... What works in this poem is the way that the fact that it's a dream builds slowly, and we don't know, and then it turns around in an interesting way intellectually. But it does feel kind of forced and preachy in a way that's more just political, than it is... yeah. Than about poetry, which is bringing nuance and complexity out of complicated situations and making things, making order out of the chaos of our experience, making something new. The problem with most political poetry is it's not making anything new, and I think this gets in that problem. Didactic is the word. See, I'm really having trouble pulling up certain words given my lack of sleep last night. But yeah, it's didactic in the second half. Thanks for Clayton Clark for saying that. But on the way, there's some wonderful descriptions. But yeah, as Jamie Thomas says, there's some wonderful descriptions here, but no discovery that I can tell. And that's just the problem. It was a interesting idea to put into a basket of political opinion, but then there's no discovery. There's nothing surprising. There's nothing we can really learn from. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I wish it was different, more fantastical apocalypse. Yeah. Yeah, Doug Van Hooser said, first part held my interest, but the second part blew the poem apart. It doesn't work. Yeah, and Harvey Lee puts it this way: no space for the reader to think, and that's just the problem. And poetry can be a really wonderful political tool, if it's used right, which it so rarely is within political context. Maybe to close out, we'll read a different poem. We'll read The Colonel by Carolyn Forche. And this is how to do a political poem, okay? Because everybody, given the sort of environment and the way politics is at the front of everything, especially thanks to social media, that's what the news generally tends to be. We want to participate in politics, and poetry should participate in politics. But what poetry has to offer is that it's an empathy machine. It's a way to connect and see the world in a new way, to make clear the things you don't quite understand to yourself, and then by virtue of that to other people. That's the purpose, not to be didactic and tell you the right way to be, because you're just preaching to us. And if we agree, it's boring, and if we disagree, we just disagree and think you're annoyingly preaching. It doesn't do anything. It's pointless to do that. But can I get to this poem? It's funny because Poetry Foundation's website is having some issues lately. Okay, we have to read it from courtesy of instead poets.org. But this is the way to do a political poem. If you're going to be political, let's look at Carolyn Forche's The Colonel, and we'll close out by reading this poem. The Colonel. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. And the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's leg or cut his hands to lace. On the windows there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, a rack of lamb, good wine, a gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said hello on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into the water glass. It came alive there. I am tired of fooling around, he said. As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves. He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. Something for your poetry, no, he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught this scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. Yeah. And so, exactly, as Nancy Sabanek says, the juxtaposition of banality with horror is so great in this poem. And what this poem does is have you actually experience something that you have not experienced. Thankfully, and likely, if you're watching this, but maybe not. Maybe some people have lived in an actual terrifying military dictatorship where the whims of a dictator could end up with your ear laying face up or face down on the carpet. But the banality, the casualness of this brutality, of the violence being just everyday, mundane, the terror being sort of silent but palpable, it's hard to describe all the things that you feel when experiencing this poem. But you could write a poem saying, the dictator does this and this and this, and it makes us feel, silenced and terrified. But it's the details, it's the way that we enter the poem, experience the experience that the speaker of the poem is experiencing. That becomes us. That's the empathy. Then we understand more about what that experience is like. We have that with us as a kind of emotional metaphor forever because we read this amazing poem. And that's what we need to do with political poetry, not just spout our opinions, which might be great or might be foolish. I don't actually care either way. We need to make us feel this is what poetry can actually do. And as Danette Burmy says, the devil is in the details here. Yeah, Dick Westheimer says this is one of the first poems I fell in love with. and she was 30 when she wrote this. Yeah. So wonderful poem. Try to write poems if you're going to be political like this, not the didactic way that is just so common. All right, well, that's going to wrap up. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Critique of the Week. I should say we just recorded a poetry space with Dick Westheimer on the squad too this morning. Joe Barker was there as well, talking about the poems in the New Yorker. We're taking an overview there. That's the poetry space is Katie Dozier's. The show she produces, I'm co-host. We talk about something, topic of poetry, but a new episode just released that we recorded last night, actually, which was a duel between Poetry Magazine and 32 Poems, where we pick some poems at random, see who wins. It was a lot of fun to talk about, and being that honest, it was really a fun episode late last night before the smoke alarm went off like 3 hours later and woke us from our slumber. But so check that out. Now, this week's guest in the Rattlecast coming up is going to be right here, Gregory Orr. Now, if you're ever in a state where you think that poetry is not important, that there's really, it's sort of pointless what we're doing here, we're all just, talking to each other, that kind of, getting down about poetry, which happens to all, it happens to me too. Gregory Orr is the poet to listen to if you need to be reminded the meaning and power and importance of poetry, given both his life story and the way he relates to it, the way he, approaches it. His most recent book is The Selected Books of the Beloved. He has a new book coming out this spring. Just wonderful human being and poet. Gregory Orr is going to be the guest. The prompt for this week was to write an ekphrastic poem about a painting that you dislike. Let me make sure I phrase that right. Yeah, write an ekphrastic poem based on a well-known painting that you dislike. So make sure it's a painting that's sort of well-known, so you're not like ripping on someone's bad painting because you don't like it if they're like going to be hurt by it, but a well-known painting, so where they can take it. But write an ekphrastic poem about a painting you don't like. That should be fascinating. I like that concept. That's your prompt for this week. Once again, the guest is Gregory Orr, Rattlecast 305, Sunday, August 17th. The regular time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. I also want to let you know, just a heads up, starting in September, we are moving to Monday nights for the Rattlecast. I'm sorry if that makes it harder for some people. It'll be better for others. That's just the way it is. But with our expanding, family, we have 4 kids here now most of the time, and going to school and stuff, we just want the weekends for family time. So that's going to be Monday starting in September, but Sunday still for the rest of August. Gregory Orr, the guest once again this Sunday. Hope you have a great week. In the meantime, I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.